we're going to talk about how to read open response questions. And once you can read an open response question, you're already set up to solve them with all of your programming knowledge already. I have a 7-step process that you can follow to successfully answer and understand any open response question. And step 1 of this process is to read the question. Step 2 is you actually need to read the question. Don't just skip through until you find the part where you've got to write something and start writing stuff. You're probably not going to even know what to write at that point. You have to read all the words and all the code, everything they give you, and understand what they're asking. This is often the hardest part of an open response question. Once you understand what the question's asking you to do, often the solution, the code you write, is only a couple of lines of code. They're not that difficult to solve once you understand what you're trying to solve. And to figure out what you're trying to solve, after reading the question, you want to look at the examples they give you. Usually you'll be given a couple examples. If I give these inputs to the problem, I get these particular outputs. And you can work through those examples and try to figure out how they got to that output. And if you're getting different outputs, that means you're misunderstanding what the question is asking. And you should go back to step number 1 and reread the question, remembering those examples, and try to figure out what exactly is the question asking that you misunderstood the first time. After you've figured out the examples, you want to look at the actual methods they give you in the code. So you'll be given a chunk of code, just like with our labs. There'll be comments and then the methods, and sometimes there'll be methods labeled, you're going to write this code, and sometimes the methods are labeled, this code has already been written and you can just use it. So you want to identify which methods are you able to use and which methods are you going to write, and what those methods do or are supposed to do. That goes to step 5, to read the comments for each method. The comments will often have information that wasn't given in the part from the beginning that you read. So additional information about the method that is often useful, and sometimes hints in how you can implement it, and hints about what you don't need to do to implement it. Once you've read the comments and you've looked at the code and you've read the question, you want to come up with a plan. How are you going to approach your solution to this problem? Do you need to use the Humpty Dumpty algorithm or the Frankenstein algorithm or a searching algorithm? Are you going to need if statements? Are you going to need while loops? How many variables might you need? You want to think through what's your plan of action before you just start writing things. But once you have a plan, now it's time to write some code. So let's look at an example. This is an example of an open response question. You'll be given a little story that sets up what you're trying to write code to do and maybe why that code would be useful. So I'll read this real quick. Encryption can be used to make data you want to be secret hard to read. Decryption can be used to make encrypted, to make encrypted data easy to read again. Decryption is basically an undo for encryption. There are different ways to encrypt data. In order for decryption to work, you need to know what encryption algorithm was used. The odd index random encryption algorithm is a method you can use to encrypt data. It inserts a random letter in between every character in the data you want to be secret, so that the characters at odd indexes are random characters. The random characters are chosen from the initial set of characters in the original string. So this is the problem. This is describing what the code you're going to write is supposed to do. We're going to be writing encryption and decryption methods. And then the next thing it's going to give you is some examples. So the example here, they're saying, we have this original data, I like tacos, and we're going to encrypt that data. And when it is encrypted, it looks something like this. Because this problem uses random in it, it can't give you an exact output. I mean, it does, but the output you get may not match this exactly, but it's going to match the pattern. So they're saying the encrypted output, if you look at that top line, is IX space X, LX, IX, and so on. And it describes that saying each X represents a random character. So the actual output does not have a bunch of capital X's in it. Those X's are placeholders for some random letter. And this is an actual example of the output down here. So if you ran it, you'd get a different encrypted string each time, but it would look something like this. So every other letter, every even index letter is a letter from our original data, and every odd letter is just a random letter also chosen from the original data. The question said that that's where the random letters come from. So this is the part we're looking at the example. I think we understand it. If it doesn't make sense how we got from the original data to the encrypted data, then you want to go back and you want to reread the question and try to figure out what are you missing. So if you didn't understand where the letters, the random letters were coming from that replaced the X's, you could come back and read, and you'd hopefully see, like that last sentence says, the random characters are chosen from the initial set of characters in the original string. That's describing where those random characters are being chosen from. Once you've looked at the examples and you understand the examples, now we want to look at our methods and read the comments. So you'll be given a chunk of code that's the class that you're going to write. It's almost like a lab, except for it's on a piece of paper instead of on the computer. And remember, we read comments from top to bottom. So that top comment describes the getRandomCharacter method. This comment describes the encrypt method. And this comment describes the decrypt method. The top method here, getRandomCharacter, it says it's implemented in part B. This method right here, encrypt, is going to be implemented in part A, and decrypt is implemented in part C. So this is going to be a three-part question where you're going to write the body of each one of these methods. And the first one will be part A. The first one will be encrypt. So let's look at that. Encrypt. So you'll be given, for each one of the parts in open response, there might be a sentence or two giving you some setup for it in addition to what came on the beginning of the question. You'll see the comment again, and you'll see the method header, and then you'll fill in the rest of the page with your answer. So part A says, write the encrypt method. Assume the getRandomCharacter method works as specified. You must use the getRandomCharacter method to get full credit. Complete the encrypt method below. And then we're given the comment, which says that this method will encrypt the original data using the odd index random algorithm that was described on the first page. It has a parameter, which is a string called original, and that has the data. Hold on. All right. I think whoever drove by is gone now. So string original has the data that you are encrypting. Then this next comment here, return string, we're returning a string value. So we're going to return the encrypted data as a string. And that's what it says, the encrypted version of the original. And then there's a precondition. So a precondition is, it's telling you something you can assume is true. So this says that original.length is greater than 1. So you can assume that the length of original has more than one character in it. The smallest original will be is 2 characters long. And that's just something you can take for granted in this problem. You don't need to write an if statement to check for that. You don't have to deal with any situations where there's 0 or 1 characters in original. The precondition sets you up to not worry about certain edge cases. Another thing that this question specifies up top is it says, assume the getRandomCharacter method works as specified. And you must use the getRandomCharacter method to get full credit. So that's giving us a pretty big hint, not only of how we can solve the problem, but something we must do. And if we don't do that, we will get less points for the problem. You actually won't get full credit if you solve it in a different way that doesn't use the getRandomCharacter method. So I'm going to go back real quick, because in order to write encrypt, we have to understand what the getRandomCharacter method does. So I'm going to read the comment for that, which is the first comment, right? Because we read top to bottom. So the getRandomCharacter comment comes before the method header. It says, it returns a random character from stir. Each character has an equal chance of being selected. And it has a parameter, which is a string called stir. It's the string to get a random character, from. So you give this method a string, and it's going to pick a random character from that string. And it returns a string, and the string it returns is a random character from stir. So the param and the return comment kind of repeat what the method is supposed to do. And again, there's a precondition that the length of stir is going to be greater than 1. So there's at least 2 characters in this string. So if we assume this works, if I call the getRandomCharacter method and pass it a string, I will get back a string of length 1 that's randomly chosen from the argument that I passed it. So that's useful information to know for solving my encrypt method. And that's going to be part of my solution. So we have to come up with a plan. So how are we going to do this? write the encrypt method, we need to somehow take a string and transform it into another string that has a different character in between every character. So if my string was ABC, then my encrypted one would be A something, B something, C something. Okay, that's what we have to get to. So I need to, so now I'm going to think about what are the different algorithms I know about. Can I use any algorithms I know to solve this? Does this sound like a Humpty Dumpty problem? Do I have to break a string apart and put it back together somehow? And yes, we do need to do that, right? We need to take the string original, break the first character off, put something in between, put it back together, then break the next character off, put something in between and put it back together. But the Humpty Dumpty algorithm is really just used for a one-time break it apart, put it back together. When you need to do something a bunch of times, you're going to need an algorithm that uses a loop. So this sounds more like a Frankenstein problem where we're going to start with nothing and just start adding characters to our answer. Add the first character to our encrypted string and then a random character. Add the next character from original and then a random character. So that seems like a pretty good plan. And once that loop is done, we would have all the answer in answer, and we just return that. So the encrypted string would be there. So I'm going to try to implement that plan real quick. So here I've got written out, there's get random character, which we're assuming works. And then the method we're writing, public static string encrypt string original. So original is our parameter. This has the value that we're encrypting, and we need to return a string that's going to be the encrypted version. So as an example here, if original was ABCD, our answer is going to be A something, B something, C something, D something, where these underscores are a random character that we get using the get random character method, because the problem told us to use that. So if I'm going to write the Frankenstein algorithm, I'm going to remember that it starts by creating an empty answer. So my string answer is the empty string, which is what I'm going to return. So I'm just going to write that real quick. Return the answer. So everything I write now is going to be in between creating my empty answer and returning it. I'm going to be populating the answer. So for Frankenstein to work, I want to iterate over all of the characters of original. So as long as original has characters in it, I want to be iterating over them. So I'm going to say while original.length is greater than 0. So while original has characters in it, I'm going to iterate over those characters. And then there's two things I definitely have to do in here. I have to get the first character from original, and then I have to remove the first character from original. So I'm going to make a string called letter, and I'm going to assign it the first character from original. So what tool do I use to isolate the first character from a string? I want to get from original the substring starting at index 0 and ending up to but not including index 1. So this statement will get the first character from original and store it into the variable letter. Then I want to remove the first character from original because I need the length of original to be getting smaller and smaller for my while loop to eventually become false, right? Because every time it iterates, I should be removing that first letter. So I'm going to change original. I'm going to assign it a new value. I'm going to assign it the value of itself without the first character. So again, I can use substring starting at index 1 and going all the way to the end. That's going to be everything from original except for the first character. And then I'm going to assign that into original. So now I have the first letter and I've modified original to remove the first letter. Now I need to modify answer. And there's actually two things we need to do. So this is the tricky part. What I just did here was just your standard Frankenstein algorithm. It almost always looks like this. Now, what do I want to do? How am I going to manipulate answer? Do I need to check something with an if statement? Or do I have to think about how I'm manipulating the order of these letters? For this particular problem, we want all the letters in the same order, but what's changing is if I go from A, B, C, D, I want to have A and then something, and then B and then something, and then C and then something. So each iteration of the loop is actually going to add 2 characters to my answer. It's going to add the character I just isolated plus another character. So I'm actually going to add 2 things to my string. I don't have to check anything. So I don't need an if statement. I'm just going to say answer is assigned itself, or I can just do plus equals, the letter. So I'm going to take the letter I just isolated, add it to my answer, but then I also need to add a random character. And how am I going to get a random character? Well, I'm just going to use the getRandomCharacter method that the problem told me to use. So getRandomCharacter, and when I call this method, it takes one parameter. So I had to pass it some string. The string is going to contain all the letters I'm going to randomly choose from. And the problem says that I'm going to choose from the original pool of letters, which means I probably want to use original. Except looking at this, I'm changing original. Original keeps changing. I keep removing letters. And that's not what the problem wants. The problem wants me to always be picking a random letter from the original string. So what I probably need to do is make a copy of original. So I'll actually make another string and just call it copy and store original in it. And then I'm going to pass copy to getRandomCharacter. And that should work. So copy has a reference to original. The original before we've changed it. And now we call getRandomCharacter on copy. And so it's always going to be getting a random character from the original string before we've manipulated it. When we change original here, we're actually creating a new substring and assigning that to original. So it's not actually changing the value that copy has a reference to. So we don't have to worry about this code here modifying what the value of copy is on us, because they're pointing to the same thing, but then original ends up pointing to a different thing. So we have 2 different references there. So as this loop runs, it loops through all original, isolates the first letter, then removes the first letter, then it adds that letter to the answer, then it gets a random character from the copy of original and adds that to answer. And then once that loop's done, it returns the answer. And that seems pretty good for the encrypt method. And then, of course, you would go from here and you'd read part B, and you would solve that, and then you read part C, and you would solve that. And that's what you're going to do in the fun sheet. So you're going to go ahead and finish this problem. So that's part A, and then you're going to finish part B and part C, following that 7-step plan. So read the problem, go through the example, make sure you understand the example. I'm trying to remember what they are off the top of my head. Read the code, read the methods, come up with a plan, and then write your answer down, just like we just did here. So good luck and have fun.